When you're brand new to the kettlebell, learning new movements can feel a lot like rubbing your head and patting your belly at the same time. And this oftentimes leads to mistakes. I f***ed up. Which is why today I want to address 5 common mistakes beginners make with the kettlebell and how to avoid them. Let's dive in. Mistake number 1 is holding the kettlebell like a dumbbell, which oftentimes leads to what I refer to as sassy wrist syndrome, which is when the wrist bends backwards like this here. See, when we grab a kettlebell, we don't actually grab in the center of the handle. We actually want to have this handle sitting across the heel of our palm at a 45-degree angle like this. But in order to understand this, we need to understand a few things about the anatomy of the kettlebell. So if you look at a kettlebell, what we're looking at here is the handle, we have the corners, and we have the horns here that lead up to the corner of said handle. And whenever we go to insert our hand through the handle of the kettlebell, so we get in that front rack position, we want to go on the index finger side on that corner. So if I hold my hand up just like this with palm up, I want to look at that index finger side. I want to go ahead and take this little crease here, which by the way is called your perlicue, fun fact, and you're going to run that right into the corner of the kettlebell, racking that handle at a 45-degree angle across the palm. If you want to make sure that you don't look like a newbie to the kettlebell, this is a fantastic place to start, is just mastering your front rack position. And the reason this is a fantastic place to start is there are so many movements that stem from this front rack position or lead to it. So for example, if I do a kettlebell clean, that leads to the front rack position. If I do a single arm front squat, that is from the front rack position. If I do a weighted carry in the front rack position, like the name hints, it's in the front rack, or even something like an overhead press. So when it comes to making sure that we avoid common mistakes with the kettlebell, just mastering this one thing, that front rack position, is going to clean up a ton of other movements with the kettlebell. Which leads me to common mistake number 2, which is wearing something like a watch or a fitness device when you are performing movements that involve the front rack. Anytime you're kettlebell training, there's a good chance you're going to end up in the front rack position. With that said, if you are wearing something like a watch, it's going to affect your ability to get into it, and or you might smash the screen, because if you look at the way this kettlebell is going to come to the front rack here, that is exactly where my watch would be sitting on this hand, right? So if you want to avoid damaging the screen of your watch and you're really insistent upon, wearing it, just make sure that you flip this around. That way the screen is on the underside of your wrist. That way you're not cracking your screen. Otherwise, if you don't have much of a preference, I would actually prefer personally that you don't wear the watch at all, because it's going to make things much easier for you when it comes to mastering your technique. If you found that tip helpful, smash that like button and stick around for the last 3 tips. Mistake number 3 that beginners make with the kettlebell is missing the connection in swing patterns. Now the connection is when we're actually lowering the kettlebell from the top of something like a snatch, swing, a clean, and what we're looking for on the way down is actually for our forearm to make contact with our hip before we send our hips back. What I often see though is this, where the hips come back early and there's this disconnect here. The few things that happen when we miss that connection between the forearm and the hip, number 1 is that we put excessive strain on the lower back. And part of that is because that bell is dipping below our knee, or rather our hand is dipping below our knee. We actually want to keep our hand above our knee on our swing patterns. The way we do that is by waiting for that forearm to make contact with the hip like so. The other thing that we got to think about is that anytime we have connection between the forearm and the hip, when we are doing swing patterns, whether it be a single arm swing, a 2-hand swing, a snatch, a single arm clean, all of these generate from the hips. So we're trying to get the power from our hips, and if we don't have the connection from our hip to our forearm, we miss out on all sorts of power that we're trying to develop from the exercise. So dialing in this connection is important. If you find yourself from the side view like I am here with this disconnect, as your hips are coming back and your forearm hasn't made contact, I want you to pretend like you're playing the egg toss game. Now the reason I want you to envision the egg toss game is because whenever you catch an egg, you end up absorbing the impact. If I reach out and I clap on it like this, right, I'm gonna break the egg. So if I go to catch an egg, I want to absorb that impact here, and the same thing is true when we're thinking about our kettlebell. Only difference being is that the kettlebell is the egg and our hips are our hands. So check this out. When that bell is coming down, whether it be from something like a snatch, whether it be from something like a clean, or whether it be from something like a single arm swing, every time I want you to notice how my forearm makes contact with my hips, and how my hips absorb just like my hands would if I were to catch an egg like so. This one tip here is going to take you from a beginner looking swing, clean, or snatch to something that looks much more like an intermediate or even advanced level if you get this dialed in. And speaking of stepping up your swing patterns, mistake number 4 is when beginners lean backwards on their swing patterns. Oftentimes what I see is people get a little overexcited on the upward phase, especially when they're learning something like a kettlebell swing, and their shoulders will get way behind their hips like this here. Now it's okay if your shoulders get behind your hips on one condition, and that condition is that you're not breaking from the midsection here. So a lot of times what I see people overextend in the low back like this, and this puts unnecessary strain on the lower back. You can, however, especially when you're swinging a heavy bell, get your shoulders behind your hips if that weight shift is coming from your foot. So check this out. You ever seen like Michael Jackson do the Michael Jackson lean here? So now if we go like this and we lean backwards slightly, if I lean backwards, I have this little bit of wiggle room in my foot. If I lean slightly more towards my heel to counterweight the kettlebell, that is okay. What's not okay is if my rib cage flares like this here and I arch my lower back. So if with this one here, if you feel like you're swinging a heavy bell and you really need to counterweight, shift the weight through your foot, not through your abdomen. And by abdomen, I mean don't shift through your lower back. Sometimes speaking on camera is hard, okay? Anywho, it's time for the final tip. The fifth and final mistake I see beginners make frequently when they're approaching their kettlebell training is not having a clear plan or a clear progression. If you don't have a plan on where you're trying to take your training, it makes it really difficult to attain a goal. And when I'm talking about a plan or a progression, I'm talking about like, how do you put together your workouts? What are you thinking about when it comes to planes of motion? How are you increasing your volume or your intensity? And what's the relationship between those two variables? These things all matter when it comes to putting together something that is going to elicit results. So if you want to lose the weight and keep it off for good and have an interest in kettlebells, you can grab a copy of my free kettlebell kickstart guide from the link in the description below. And inside of there, you will find a clearly laid out workout, and as well as some tips to avoid the 3 most common mistakes that busy professionals make when they embark on their weight loss journey with the kettlebell. With that said, if you found these tips helpful and you want more kettlebell content on the regular, smash that subscribe button and I'll see you on the next one.